Apa kabar? Nama saya Riko Anggara. Saya bersama Miklos Gaspar. Dia adalah Direktur Pusat Informasi PBB yang bertanggung jawab untuk Asia Tenggara. Sudah bertugas sejak 2022. Mr. Gaspar, thank you for being here, taking your time in the middle of your meetings.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
All right. Let's dive into the big news. This week, Indonesia officially joining the Board of Peace by President Trump. Some critics say this board might undermine the UN authority. Your thoughts?
Well, I don't think that the UN's authority or the UN's role can be undermined by a group. The UN is the international multilateral body with the largest number of member states. Almost every country in the world is a member of the UN, and the UN has decision-making mechanisms, in place in which these member states participate. As for the Board of Peace, the United States submitted a proposal to the Security Council a few weeks ago, putting forward this idea of the Board of Peace as a tool towards maintaining the fragile peace in Gaza and supporting the situation of Palestine. As such, it was approved by the Security Council, and the United Nations, therefore, it looks forward to it being implemented in a manner in which it was approved by this UN body.
So what will happen? I mean, this one is Board of Peace and this is UN. And if this new Board of Peace starts running things in Gaza, will UN and this Board of Peace walking side by side, or could you?
Yes, so the UN is not running things in Gaza. The UN has various bodies, including the UNRWA, UNRWA, that support the Palestinian people, including those in Gaza, in their situation and doing humanitarian work there. That is very different from running a territory. It is not in the mandate of the UN to run Gaza or Palestine at large.
So what will happen? Which part the authority of UN and which part of the authority of Board of Peace? I mean, have you guys talked about this, or I don't know?
Well, so the UN performs its work based on the decision of member states. UNRWA was founded by UN member states, and all the programs of organizations like the World Health Organization, the World Food Programme, and others that are supporting the people of Palestine have been approved by their various governing bodies. The United Nations, and the Secretary General has said this several times, hopes that whatever other bodies emerge, they will support the implementation of these resolutions and help these organizations continue their really important and life-saving mandates.
Indonesia says that joining the BOP to represent the Global South is the UN happy to have a friend like Indonesia inside the room of this new US-led groups?
Well, Indonesia, along other member states of the UN, are free to join various organizations and groupings, and they do. There are several multilateral organizations around the world. The view of the United Nations is again that it's an implementing body of its member states, of which Indonesia is one of them, and it looks forward to collaborating with all kinds of bodies that are there to support implementation of UN resolutions and the goals of the multilateral community. Having a viable Palestine, for instance, that is, as you know, a long-standing UN resolution that's not been implemented so far. If the Board of Peace and any other structure that may come into being will help the lot of the Palestinian people, will create peace and prosperity, then the UN welcomes that.
Mr. Gaspar, there's a lot of war talk lately, with people fearing of a third global war. How close or far are we actually to the global breakdown of peace according to UN internal polls?
Well, so sure, I've also read the message of former President SBY, for instance, on this topic. Clearly, we are not in an easy place. Having said that, the United Nations has managed to, achieved its primary objective since it was created in 1945 of there being no Third World War. It's not the first time that the situation is difficult. think back to the time of the Cold War, the Cuban Missile Crisis, other issues when the world came very close to a conflict, a major conflict. These have been avoided in large part thanks to the United Nations. So as long as the United Nations can continue to perform its functions as a multilateral body where diplomacy works, where member states come together to discuss international issues, I'm confident that we can avoid a third world war.
You mentioned that the situation is difficult, right? What is the UN doing specifically to cool down the friction between the major superpowers?
Well, the UN mostly provides a platform for conversations. The Security Council is such a body where discussions about how to resolve conflicts and how to support countries in resolving conflicts takes place.
There's a critic. Some of people feel that the UN is toothless. What do you think?
Well, the UN has had, a lot of achievements under its belt over the last 80 years. Some people say it could do more. Sure, the UN would be first one to agree to that. The UN is an implementing body of its member states. The UN's, even the Secretary General, who is sort of like a COO of this body, can do whatever member states have authorized it to do. So if you think the UN is toothless, or anybody thinks the UN is toothless, please work with your governments to give the UN stronger mandate in certain areas. UN decisions in the area of peace and security are made at the Security Council. The Security Council was created in 1945. It reflects the reality of the world as it was in 1945. The Secretary General, along with many member states, has called for a reform of this decision-making body, but again, it is not up to the UN. It is up to member states whether they want to make such a reform.
Who caused this dynamic situation?
Sorry, say that again?
Who or what
caused this situation? Well, you mean the situation of the
dynamic, the difficulties, just like you said.
I mean,
the tension.
I think ever since human
history. The World War III diction.
Look, ever since human history started, we know about wars and tension and whatnot. I don't think one can point finger to a country or to a group of countries that has caused this. There are differences in opinion and differences in ways in which countries would like to resolve conflicts. The United Nations was born at the end of the Second World War because countries have realized that the traditional means of resolving conflicts, which is we go to war, it's simply not helpful. And it creates destruction, it's not good for anybody. The setup of the United Nations today reflects that realization, but also it reflects a time when most member states of the UN, including Indonesia, were not yet sovereign countries. So this is why the Secretary General, as I mentioned earlier, has called for reform of the Security Council, of the decision-making structures of the UN, that they become more representative of the world today and not of the world of 80 years ago.
What do you think, or what UN thinks about President Trump?
Well, the UN doesn't think...
what do you think?
Look, I think many things about many different subjects. It is not the role of the UN to comment...
Specifically about President Trump.
President Trump is a democratically elected leader of a UN member state, also the most powerful country in the world. Of course, the UN wishes that the United States, like all member states, pay their dues to the UN as mandated. This is currently not the case.
He calls the UN useless.
It's his right to call the UN useless. The UN is not here to tell member states what to do. I think if we look at what the UN has achieved and continues to achieve under difficult circumstances, there's a lot, and the UN could achieve a lot more if it were given stronger mandates by the member states.
Okay, let me change my question. Is all of this, the tension, this whole dynamic thing, down to President Trump?
I think that would be an oversimplification of the global situation.
Give us an insight.
There have been conflicts in the last 80 years. There continue to be conflicts today. Some of these conflicts are bigger than before. The major conflicts in the world, Sudan, huge civil war That's where the highest number of people, die among all the wars in the world. It's got nothing to do with the U.S. or President Trump. Another conflict, the war in Ukraine, has been going on for a number of years, sadly. Whether the Hamas-Israel war, also, it's thankfully it's stopped now.
Maduro.
But it was all done before. Look, Greenland, Maduro. The Secretary General calls for each member state, including the United States, to act in line with the UN Charter and international law. There are some member states that don't always act in line with international law. All the UN does is, calls for, and many others in the the global community, call for respect for the charter that all of these countries, including the US, have signed up to.
Then how can the UN, stand its ground against the leader like Trump, who openly calls the organization useless?
Look, member states have a right to criticize the UN. In fact, there is a UN reform that has been going on before Trump came to office. The UN needs the member states to help improve. I would very much challenge, and the Secretary General would very much challenge, a characterization of the UN as useless, looking at, for instance, the fact that in the last 80 years there has not been a third world war, and we sure hope that will remain the case.
How about Indonesia? What do you think about Indonesia in this whole dynamic world?
Well, Indonesia, since President Prabowo has taken office, since President Prabowo took office, has taken a much more active role in multilateral diplomacy and in the UN, and that is, of course, very welcome. It was great that the UN appreciates, other member states appreciate that President Prabowo came to address the General Assembly for the first time in 10 years. There was an Indonesian president there. Indonesia, with its bebas-aktif foreign policy, can play a role in helping to forge coalitions around different issues in the UN. Indonesia, time and time again, speaks up for multilateralism, speaks up for the rule of law, speaks up for the rights of countries under the UN Charter.
You talk about the non-aligned foreign policy of Indonesia. Does the UN see this as a model for other countries to prevent a Cold War, or what do you think about this kind of method?
Well, it's not in the prerogative of the UN to comment on countries' foreign policies or see what may be a model for one or the other. As long as a country respects the rights of other countries, as long as it respects international law, the UN would have no critical remarks to make on that country.
For our viewers at home who feel that some of the viewers might think that UN is a building in New York, why does what you do here in Jakarta in Indonesia matter to an ordinary people, ordinary Indonesian citizen?
Sure, thank you for that question. Because so far we've spoken about the global role of the UN, not about the role of the UN in Indonesia. There are around 25 UN agencies that are active here in Indonesia in support of the government of Indonesia, on the invitation of the government of Indonesia to help Indonesia reach its development objectives in line with the global sustainable development goals. So that is what UN programs bring to Indonesia, supporting the country's climate goals, resilience building in face of the impacts of climate change, helping the government and provincial authorities raise money to finance development objectives, working with the education sector, the health sector, the culture sector, agriculture, you name it, based on international best practices that will help Indonesia develop in a more sustainable manner.
We're now in 2026, midway to 2030 SDGs, right? How would you describe the current health relationship between the UN and the Indonesian government?
It is a very fruitful, relationship. Like I said, the UN is here. Several UN agencies are here to support the Indonesian government. We work hand in hand with Kemlu, Bappenas, and the various line ministries in in carrying out programs and projects that support the development of Indonesia. At the same time, as Indonesia develops and has more and more experience to share with other countries that are perhaps further behind on the development ladder, the UN very much welcomes and supports that. And Indonesia is increasingly becoming a country in areas of development where it supports other countries, poorer countries, whether in Africa or Asia, and works using the platforms of the UN to share its own experience.
Which specific area, the climate, the economy, or the digital gap is the biggest red alert for Indonesia right now?
Well, there are 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and Bappenas maintains a list of topics where on how Indonesia is doing in meeting the SDGs. And there are some where it is further behind than others. One of these is renewable energy. Another one is women's rights and gender equality. So, the role of the UN in Indonesia is not so much to monitor this progress. Indonesia has a capable body in place, the Statistics Office, BPS, or Bappenas, that monitor this. And we are here to offer expertise and help to meet those objectives that the government would like to have international support on.
Last but not least, what is the one thing that an individual can do to help the UN, to help the world missions for peace?
Well, there are many things that we can all do in our day-to-day life to have peace and development. First, by not spreading disinformation, but by spreading correct information about all these global issues. That is one thing. The second one, in our personal lives, what do we do? How do we live? Do we leave the air conditioner on at 16 degrees while the door is open and wasting resources? Do we take a car and stuck in traffic, or do we take a Transjakarta bus or KRL? There are so many things in which we in our own life can influence environmental objectives and also development objectives. To speak of another area, how do we do we respect persons with disabilities? If I am an employer, if I have a small business, do I provide a non-discriminatory environment for people with disabilities, for women, for minorities? There are really many ways in which all of us, in our own spheres of influence, can do a lot for peace and particularly for development.
Pak Miklos Gaspar, terima kasih meluangkan waktu untuk liputan SCTV.
Thank you. Terima kasih banyak saya juga.